Welcome. Yesterday, Lloyds Bank announced a £3.9 billion net profit for half-year results. The head office of Lloyds Bank and the senior management have been celebrating all over social media and in the press about their success. Let's look into some of those facts and see whether we, the British taxpayer, the victims and the customers of Lloyds Bank, should be celebrating with them. Do we celebrate that if it wasn't for the British taxpayer bailing the bank out to the tune of £20 billion, this bank would no longer exist? Do we celebrate that a British institution and a household name has been nursed back to health? Do we celebrate that shareholders who have been lumbered with Lloyds Bank stock for many years because it's fallen into negative equity are finally going to get a return on their investment? Do we celebrate that the return on that investment is less than 1p a share? Do we celebrate that Lloyds Bank was the biggest culprit for mis-selling PPI to the British public? Do we celebrate that only earlier this month they were fined £19 million by the FCA for misleading their insurance customers? Do we celebrate that Lloyds Bank has effectively stolen from all of us? Do we celebrate Lloyds' denial of the fraud within Lloyds Reading and the persecution of their victims? Do we celebrate that the convicted criminals have nearly finished their sentencing, but the victims of those crimes are still waiting for proper restitution? Do we celebrate that Lloyds has failed to raise adequate provisions for the frauds in Bristol and the frauds in Reading? Do we celebrate the Griggs, the Foskett, the Cranston and the Dobbs review, which have swallowed up hundreds of millions of pounds of shareholder funds, and yet that money could have gone to the victims? Do we celebrate the gesture politics and the virtue signalling that the bank puts out in order to manipulate the UK population? Do we celebrate Lloyds Bank gaslighting its victims? Do we celebrate the clear lack of corporate governance within Lloyds Bank? Do we celebrate that despite the senior management of Lloyds Bank knowing about the frauds, they're keeping quiet? Do we celebrate that the person behind the concealment of the crimes at Lloyds Bank, the former CEO Antonio Horta Osorio, has received a knighthood? And finally, do we celebrate that the person who may have masterminded the whole strategy of the destruction of small businesses is now chairman of the bank?